Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us, whether you're here on Facebook or YouTube. Welcome to the talkback for the Drowning Girls, presented by Strand Theater Company. Before we start, I'm going to hand you off to Mallory Shear, who is our intimacy choreographer and safety coordinator.
We just have a quick trigger warning for you, which is very similar to what we had for the show. Just a quick warning that we will be discussing things relating to gaslighting, violence against women, emulation of death, abuse, misogyny, and serial murder. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Emilie and we'll introduce everybody.
So again, welcome. I'm Emilie Zelle Holmstock. I'm the director for the Drowning Girls, and I'm going to be the facilitator tonight. So please, we're anxious to hear your questions. To start out, I'm going to have everyone go around and say who they are within the cast and crew. That way you can get to know us a little bit and have a little bit better of an idea who you might want to direct your questions to. So let's start with the cast. We'll go bathtub order. So we'll start with Acacia.
Hi, my name is Acacia Danielson. Yeah, I play Bessie Mundy and others. And yeah, happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Mika Jane Nakano. I performed as Alice. I also helped paint the background and at the posters.
And I'm Betsy Lyons, and I played Margaret and others.
All right, let's go to Glenn.
I'm Glenn Ritchie. I did the video production.
Maggie, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm Maggie Flanagan. I was the costumer for the show.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Smith. I was the stage manager.
I'm Mallory Shear. I was the intimacy choreographer and safety officer.
I'm Heiko. I did sound design.
And I'm TJ, and I did the lighting design.
Awesome. So if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them into the comments on our Facebook or YouTube feed, and they'll pop into here. But while we're waiting for comments, I guess I can start off with some questions if we don't have any come up. So who is ready to answer some questions? Excellent. Let's start with one that can go to everyone. So why don't we'll go actors and then crew for this one. And how does it feel to have been back on stage? Like a real solid, albeit slippery stage. Does anyone want to answer to start us off?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I mean, Bessie has a line in the show about when she sees he who should not be named for the first time, it's like she's been holding her breath and she can now breathe. And that's kind of what it felt like to be back on stage. Like, the first time, like the three of us took our masks off and we're actually just able to communicate whole face to whole face and not have to worry about, being distant. It just felt like a restoration of like a vital piece of human connection that we hadn't had. And to get to use your full instrument was just lovely. So it was great.
I'll follow because my body can't contain answering that question. I'm just like so ecstatic about it. I was super excited to have that opportunity. I think the most fun was just being able to like see each other's, like to be able to read and connect in person as a whole body and not just their upper body, right? With all the Zoom call and to be in the same space. Oh my gosh, one of my favorite moment was like just being in the tub and like the echo, and you could hear sometimes like the breathing, and you just feel the air. I miss that so much.
I think you probably saw, if you're watching, as soon as Emilie asked that question, pretty much everyone on this screen just started grinning because we all missed it so terribly. And being there and being on the stage and being in the bathtubs and being in the water and having the costumes and everything, doing theater on Zoom is great, don't get me wrong. But doing all of that in the space with everybody just has a completely different feeling that being online, just it can't match it.
I'm going to jump in on this question too before we continue down the line. Yeah, I think everybody's already articulated quite well, but it feels like going home, you know? Like, I think Acacia, yeah, you have the holding your breath until suddenly it feels like you can breathe again. And it's just different being there and actually getting to be in the vicinity and even just smell a theater, right? Like we all know when you go in, and it just is, it's a different kind of magic. And even though I was a little sad that my amazing actors could not perform to a live audience, except the few of us that got to watch it every night. It's such this particular show I don't think would really work via Zoom. And so it was really an honor for me to be able to produce something like this and actually have it go up on a stage and see the vision come to life in a 3D capacity. And then, you know, kind of back to a 2D one, but for a brief moment. Glenn?
Yeah, for me, so video has been my day job for a very long time. And the reason I got into theaters because and particularly immersive theaters, to do like real things with real people. And so when COVID hit and everybody sort of rushed to put stuff in the video, I was like, okay, just wake me up when it's over. I can't do this. But, you know, a year later and 100 Zoom plays later, I thought, okay, I think I'm ready. I feel like I have something to add to this. Let's do it. And in a relative sense, it did feel so much more real to be in a physical space with other creatives making something. So yeah, it was nice to be just back doing something that felt substantial.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience as a customer doing it, moving from what we had before in-person theater, where I could touch the actors or take their measurements whenever, every single rehearsal, no problem, to getting 3 days notice and finally being able to measure all you guys and then put out costumes and make it all happen was like a really interesting challenge. But also being out of live theater for so long, hadn't costumed in almost a year, which was crazy. And it just felt really good to use that skill again and be in it and producing something.
Emily, you took the words out of my mouth. It felt like home, and it was such a pleasant feeling. We had so many logistics going on when we were first getting into rehearsals that the moment didn't hit me until we were running tech rehearsals, and I had QLab open in front of me up at the desk. And all of a sudden I was like, this is theater. We're really doing it. It's really happening. It's going on. And it was so exciting. It just tingles.
It was amazing to be back in a shared space, but I had a little bit of a different challenge in that my job was partially to make sure that shared space felt comfortable when we hadn't shared a space with people outside our COVID bubbles in a year. So while it did feel like home and a wonderful place for me to be, I did have a little bit of a different challenge in making it still a safe space for us all in my capacity as intimacy choreographer.
A lot of my work wound up being in post, but for the parts that were in the space, it felt like home. The last thing I had been doing before COVID hit was sound design on another production. And so it was interesting to just, like, you know, being somebody who jumps from project to project and does a couple different things. It was crazy because it almost felt like, even though it felt like it had been 1,000 years, because I went from sound design to sound design, it also felt like no time had passed and that I was just back in the groove and kind of in the thing. And then going into post, it felt like a completely different animal that I didn't understand at all. But it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, Yeah, basically what they all just said. No, but it was weird getting back into the space in a good way. I had forgotten how to do what I was supposed to do. I pulled up my lighting board and I said, "Oh crap, I don't remember the keystrokes. Can I do this?" And so that was just a really interesting couple of moments to try and figure, like, can I get back on this bicycle and ride it? Yeah, I think I can. And so just being in the space and working on it, it all came back. And that was the fun part for me, was just feeling these memories smack me around and just like, oh yes, that's right. I can. Oh, I forgot I can do this fade. That's great. So those moments were what was really exciting. And I think when we get back to full on live theater, I think a lot of people are going to get those moments of, oh, that's right. I remember this feeling of when I used to be able to like do X, Y, and Z. So yeah, that was my excitement, was remembering that I did know how to do things.
That's great. All right. It looks like we have quite a few questions rolling in. So for our first question, it's from K. Megan Washington. And K. Megan wants to know, was all the water on the stage actually water, or was some of it created as part of the scenic design? I'm going to shoot that question over to our stage manager, Jen. I know all of us can answer this one, but Jen.
Oh, it was absolutely 100% real water. Real water. We filled each tub with buckets and buckets of water. We splashed it around the stage at the beginning to get the stage primed for our cast. We heated it up, or tried to. Sorry if it was too cold. When we took breaks, and we shop vacuumed it out afterwards. So it was 100% real water.
Yes, there was a lot of towels and coordination involved at the end of the show. I think for a lot of us, probably the first show where most of the end of the night was spent soaking up water in putting it back into buckets. But yes. Does anyone else want to speak to the water on stage? And it was never cold. I don't know. My actors are going to glare at me and tell me I'm a liar, but yes. All right.
I'm surprised Mallory's not jumping in and talking about preventing people from slipping.
Oh yeah,
which was
that was definitely a challenge that we had. Along with the water being all over the stage, you do run into the fact that the stage did become very slippery. So we went through, I believe, Jen, it was 3 different designs in making sure that the stage ended up being safe when fully immersed in that water. So that was one of the jobs that Jen and I took on, was making sure that the stage was safe enough for them to walk around when it was fully soaked through.
I also thought that I was under the illusion that we could put individual mics on everybody, and we thought we had a solution for keeping the mic pack safe, and that's all I'll say about that.
All right.
I tried so hard.
Not your fault.
What other questions did we have from our audience? All right, costumes. How did you make all the lovely white clothes not become completely see-through when wet?
So that was a combination of material choice and adding a lot of extra lining. So for Betsy and Acacia's costumes, I started with a fabric that was 100% polyester and was going to be relatively opaque. But even so, Betsy's was fine. We ended up not having to double line it. But Acacia's, we had to fully double line the front of her shirt. And then I knew from the jump Mika's was going to need lining because it was a cotton blend. So it was a little bit thinner. But really the big thing when I was designing these costumes was I was looking at the material to begin with, and then I actually did a water test in my house. So I had a pretty good idea, like I was going to have to line Acacia's, but like maybe we could get away with it. I knew we were going to have to line Mika's, and Betsy's, I couldn't see really anything through it. So I knew right away that I would not have to double line that. But playing with that and then seeing them under the lighting was really the challenge for me, because I could line them and make them not visible when wet, but once TJ's lights hit them, all bets were off. So we might have had to go in and do it a third time, but we were lucky, and it turned out really well, and I'm really happy with how they ended up looking.
All right. And Heiko, this is also from K Megan. Where did you find the pieces for the sound design?
So the way I kind of attacked this was basically the two things or three things. There were three things that were mentioned specifically musically in the script. They talk a lot about the harmonium, and that is mentioned. The script specifically called for the wedding march, and it specifically called for the song Tea for Two. So from that, and it specifically asked for a waltz. So I basically, my process a lot of times is then I just sit with title, and I sit there and I listen to everything I can find that fits with something. So I started just going through lists of waltzes, and once I found a handful of waltzes that I liked that weren't particularly familiar to me, I sent them over to Emilie, and we both were particularly fond of one from the ballet Capella, and that rolled out. The harmonium pieces took a lot more effort to find, because you just don't have harmonium recordings chilling around anymore, because it was music that was played in the home. You sat with your little organ and played what you had. But I managed to stumble across an artist named Joris Verdin, who's an organist who has put together a ton of collections of just harmonium music from all sorts of different composers. And I leaned very heavily on his work, and basically from there, he had the collections, and I just went from scene to scene and tried to find pieces that he had that fit the mood. And I lucked out when I stumbled across him.
Great, thank you for that, Heiko. All right, let's see what else we have in here. All right, this next question is from Jenny Lees. What was the biggest challenge in putting together this production? I feel like that's probably a me question, huh? I think that not necessarily just this production, but with anything that is that we're attempting to have go up these days in the time of COVID, you should always be prepared in theater to have things happen. But with COVID restrictions and never quite knowing, what the rules of engagement, so to speak, are going to be for, the city of Baltimore or Maryland, what case numbers are going to be, what's going to happen with the cast and crew from day to day, you really have to have sort of plan A through Z. And I'm not going to lie, I think we probably got down to about plan X. So one of the difficulties is figuring out, how much time can we safely spend in the theater? When do we need to get COVID tested to make sure everyone is safe? How much can we block outside of the theater so that we're not trying to learn almost the entire show blocking in, one day? And they had to learn a lot of the show blocking in a very short amount of time when we got in the theater. So that's one of the difficulties. And the other, we've already talked about water. Water it's a whole new element that, I've known theaters before that if you talk about putting real water on the stage, they'll just flat out scream no. So luckily we had Strand, who was nice enough to take a risk and let us throw water everywhere. But it brought a whole lot of challenges that not all of us necessarily knew how to navigate in as quickly as we in the amount of time that we had, and then trying to make something that was immersive, and having, bringing Glenn in and having that whole added layer of video production, which if you want to add on, Glenn, to anything there, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, and you left out the 2 weather events that killed a good bit of our on-site time. So
That's true.
Ended up compressing a lot of the time we had, and ended up pushing the editing off for a few extra days. But I needed to be, because since there was so little time blocking, I needed to be there, like basically from the moment you started doing that, so I can learn where all the marks were, so the camera can be, right there when it needed to be. And I think we ran it 3 times for the camera. That was our plan, was run it 2 or 3 times for the camera. And then we did a day where we did what we called specials, where there was some shots where you might have noticed where the camera actually goes on stage and kind of breaks that wall, sometimes referred to as the 4th. And so that was an extra day that we did. The water actually wasn't a big deal for me, except for the one scene, the ballroom scene, where I actually did a few laps around the stage, and I was realizing it is quite slippery, and I bounced off the walls a few times. But we shot that like 2 or 3 times, because I was like, wait, this is getting good. Let's do it one more time. And I finally made the whole thing without falling over. What were other challenges?
I think one of the challenges for you and I was after, because we were still trying to meld the 2 mediums.
Right.
And so Glenn and I had a lot of talks beforehand, like those special instances of, this is my list of shots that I, as director would really like us to try and get specials. And then there was the list that Glenn had as, for the cinematography aspect and video production of what he thought would work. Luckily, I think almost all of them, we were on the same page. But then you have to take that too into editing, and that added a whole challenge of sending back and forth files and watching the show and being like, can we change this, or can we do this? And it's not something you have to do with most shows. So it's almost a reverse of the normal. The show goes up and the production team is, sort of done, and the actors carry on. And in this instance, the show goes up and the actors are done, and the production team is like, oh my gosh, how do we get this done?
Yeah, usually too, when you shoot a play, it's been rehearsed a number of times on stage, and it becomes more fixed. And so there were a lot of times when a performer might have been like 3 steps this way, and then we had to cut to another shot, or their hands were like this, and then we shot it again, and the hands were down. And it's just the kind of thing where we couldn't get that specific. There was just no time. So having to use editing trickery to make sure that stuff wasn't noticeable. I did watch it tonight for the first time, actually, just now. And I only noticed like a couple little matches on action that were off, that jumped out to me. So that worked out okay. But it took all 3 of those takes, plus all the specials. I used pieces from all of them to put it together. But it was mostly, I think, the 3rd take. We shot it over 3 nights, and it was the 3rd take that was sort of the spine that held it all together. And then we sort of took out scenes from other takes that we thought were just better for whatever reason, and kind of put them in.
Great. What else?
Somebody said how many cameras. So sorry, this was in our little. I'm letting you know there's a private chat too that we're all using. So there was basically 2 cameras. There were a couple other cameras around, but we ended up not using them that much because the 2 main cameras looked noticeably better than the other cameras. And when you jump between like a really nice camera and a not so good camera, it's pretty jarring. So we ended up just not using it. And luckily we shot it enough times that the 2 cameras caught it. So there was one stable camera in front that was locked down, and I was shooting in, this is getting a little technical, but it's not too bad. So 4K, it's twice the resolution of standard HD, which is kind of like what you're kind of like watching less than standard HD right now. 4K lets you then go digitally sort of pan and zoom around. So you may have seen it looked like the camera was following, but the camera was actually staying still. But there was the other camera that was really moving around. That was me moving around all the time with this camera that was on a gimbal, which is a thing that stabilizes the camera. And I just was doing that as soon as they were running the show. I kept doing it so everyone could be comfortable and know what I would be doing and not be thrown off by what I was doing. But then I could always, it took me that long. It took me several runs with all the rehearsals to learn where to stand at the right times.
Great. All right, what other questions? All right, this one is from Elena. What are the lessons learned in this show that you will take to your next projects? Oh, that's not a big question at all, Elena. Does anyone want to answer this one first? No, no one? What about you, TJ?
I was thinking on it. Just remembering patience when working with people, because it's been a while, and interacting with people is not something that came naturally back to me. It was like, I'm seeing all these lovely faces on the screen here. I don't remember seeing any of those faces except for the three actors on stage, because everybody was masked and distanced, and it was just like, yeah, I mean, it's not directly related to the theater, but it was just, the working with people again, and patience, especially with Tech Week is always stressful, but Tech Week with an added element of the COVID is, high stress in all of those wonderful, crazy ways that we all remember. Yeah, so that was a good jog in my memory. Like, just breathe through the mask, you'll make it.
Great. Anyone else want to hop in on this one? No. I think for me, kind of going off what TJ is saying there in terms of, at least for like the next few shows, over communicate, I think, coming back. I know a lot of us are used to working with specific groups of people. You can find a theater, and a lot of times you go back or you've worked with people before, you kind of develop that shorthand. But because we have taken such big breaks or steps back, I think one thing that I'll definitely work on is just not assuming that anyone understood, and even if it involves changing what I'm saying multiple times to make sure it's just very clearly communicated. And that seems silly, and maybe it will drive some people a little bonkers, but I think it's important to just make sure that things are really clear going forward. And yeah. What about any of the actors? Is there anything from this particular show that you want to take with you into the future? I know a couple of you are already working on things. No?
Oh, sorry, I was just trying to unmute. I think the thing that was a good, I guess, reminder and like, trust builder was that, like, I feel like the show came together so quickly. We had a few weeks of Zoom to like, do some character work and do some story building and like kind of get an idea of what the blocking would be, and try to pretend our chairs were bathtubs. But then, once we got in this space, in addition to like the delays because from snow, we were just adding so many elements in all at once, like props, costumes, water, tubs, actual space, being in, a room with people, intimacy choreography, like all these different things Betsy had to like, learn the show like right before, which she'd already been doing, but you're going on. So it just felt like it was harder than usual to keep the through line of the story and like what comes next, especially because the show is so like episodic and often non-linear. But I think the thing that I had to like let go of was my need to like know it all and know the show for myself, and to trust that we knew the show. Like if we were just listening to each other and kind of trusting the rhythm that we had discovered and built, that the show would kind of take care of itself. But that was definitely like hard to kind of pry my hands off the need to be certain about what the heck is happening next. And that was freeing once we think we got there. But yeah.
Great, thank you for that. I actually think I saw a question for Betsy in here relevant to what Acacia just said. Megan would like to know, Betsy, did she hear that you took over this role like a week before opening?
Basically, yes. So originally I was the understudy for all of the characters. So I was at rehearsals and like I knew the directions in which things were going, that kind of thing. And I got to do scenes a couple of times. Unfortunately, one of our original actors the original Margaret, obviously, did have to leave the show about a week before we were starting filming. So I literally, my script was my new partner for that week. It went with me everywhere and I was constantly running lines. And yeah, so I had about a week. So, we were learning blocking and learning choreography and dealing with the wet floor and all of that stuff. And I was just trying to get the words out. So it was definitely a unique challenge, this particular show for me, but a good one.
I definitely don't think anyone could tell by the time, everyone was so cohesive in terms of the cast. And they all worked really well together. So it was pretty amazing to be able to call Betsy, on a Friday and be like, hey, so I need you to actually learn this entire part, and then have her pretty much off book for the entire first half of the show about 24 hours later. So it was an amazing, amazing feat.
Just to give kudos to Mika and Acacia too, they adjusted very quickly to having a completely different actor in this very difficult show. So
yes, I lucked out with the cast, with all four of them. I feel very, very honored to have had this particular cast, because the challenges that we had to overcome in such a very compressed time period. Acacia was saying that it felt like a very short amount of time, and it really was. From the moment that we started our first read through to actually filming was we were, I think, on our second day of filming before we hit a month into like full rehearsals. So it was definitely compressed, and they all took it in stride and were some of the most optimistic theater practitioners that I've ever worked with. So I think they definitely raised the experience up for me. Okay. Next question is for Mallory. How did you work to establish connection and intimacy while maintaining safe social distance? That's a great question.
So the scene that required the most intimacy choreography was what we referred to as the murder scene towards the end of the play. And what we had to do is really build it with scaffolding, because this was really the first time that any of the characters were really within 6 feet of each other beginning. So we started just having Acacia and Betsy masked near each other without making any physical contact, just walking through it. The next time that we ran it, we went through and did kind of what I referred to as basic human contact. So things that we would have done in kind of pre-COVID times that wouldn't get anybody's cockles up or wouldn't cause any boundaries to be crossed. We don't cross any boundaries to start with, but even in pre-COVID times, just some normal human contact. And then we scaffolded from there. So we built the scene very slowly, one thing on top of it, the next. And then the very last thing that needed to happen was that masks needed to be removed. And I even remember Acacia mentioning this. It was a little strange to be this close to somebody without a mask on that very first time that it happened. So as we scaffolded each one of those new aspects on top of each other, we took the time to make sure that each one of our actors was okay with each of those things happening. And for all the rest of us, we made sure that we were taking as many precautions as possible. Most of us were double masked and wearing shields as well, so that even though we'd all been COVID tested, we were being as safe as possible in the space.
Great. Thank you for that. For the answer and for accomplishing that task, because it was certainly not an easy feat to do in also the very compressed amount of time that we had to do all of it. Were there any other questions in here from our audience? Let's see. I think I saw one about the water, another one about water and sound. Let's see. Was all the water on the stage oh no, we already did. I did that one. Sorry. Yes. Was all the water noise from the water? It was such an integral part of the story. So the water noise was from the water, and also a magical byproduct of our lovely costumes.
Yeah, we did some little bits of recording of water sounds, thinking that we were going to use it. I remember when Glenn did some, I did some, I had done some stuff at home as well, just thinking, oh, we're going to need it. And then the way things worked out so nicely with the real water, it was like, no, we don't need to sweeten this at all. It is chef's kiss. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it worked out really well. There was some nice waterfall effects that came from the skirts, and it's pretty delightful. On the opposite side of that water question, I think there was one for Glenn from Kat about the water and the filming, but
I think I could basically covered it, but yeah, the water was actually a great addition to the sound, and it wasn't conflicting at all. It was just a nice little cover and enhancement.
Great. Have there been any other questions from? Yes. All right, we will see if it pops up in a second. All right. I saw those as blurry vision in the moment. Was it logistical for the camera or an artistic choice?
No, it was falling on. Yeah,
oh,
there you go.
Yeah.
It was in the editing, choosing to use them an artistic choice. In the happening of them, so I was also double masked with a visor, and I had glasses on, and the glasses, as you may have discovered in the past year, can get fogged up. And so I'm looking at this little screen, moving this thing around, and trying to keep it all going, mostly relying on facial recognition for the camera to lock on to the whoever is in basically the center is what it's going to focus on. And then choosing an f-stop so everything sort of within like 5 feet of the person's head will be in focus. But occasionally if a person turned away, it might hunt and lose the focus. So it did, for the most part, I was able to sort of pick out those moments, but a few of them did get in where I was like, I wasn't quite so happy about the lack of focus, but I did keep a few of them in. Like there was the ballroom scene. I did like how that got kind of blurry. I liked another one when they went from the 3 of them in their like may it please the court moment, and they were in this trio, and then it pulled back, and it blurred and then it pulled back in, and it was just this nice scene change moment. So yeah, there were different times where I said, okay, I just sort of took that occasion to leave that in the editing.
Sometimes it also just worked out. I know Glenn and I went back and forth a couple of times. If there was one that was like, no, I really don't want this to be blurry. But sometimes I think the blurs also had a mind of their own in terms of, I had messaged Betsy at one point, and for Margaret's character, it only ever blurred on really important words like marriage or husband or love or bath. And I was like, I like it. So I don't know. I think the blurs became a little bit of their own added layer. Like,
and it is the kind of thing, if you had a little more time, you're able to shoot it a couple more times and be a little more particular about things, we could have dialed that in a little more cleaner. But hey,
it's okay.
You got to go with it sometimes.
Yeah. What's one thing you'd like your audience to take away from this? Anyone want to jump on this question? No? TJ?
Yeah. I think for me, one of the most important things about this show is that we remember when we're looking at maybe all these stories on or shows on ID and TV, that we definitely need to make sure we focus on the victims, not necessarily, you know, the murderer. So most of the stories are, you know, end up on the murderer because they're the ones that's still alive, but the victims are the ones that had these lives, and sometimes I think that gets swept under the rug. So always look for the victim story and be aware of that as well. That's what I loved about this, was that we were getting the story from these women's point of view. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Acacia, did I see your hand or did I make that up? No? Okay. Betsy?
Just to basically follow on what TJ was saying, that it's also, these were three very different women. And this kind of thing can happen to just about anybody, to really anybody. And one of the things about the script that I love is that it is very clear that it was not their fault. And I think that is a very important message that some folks need to hear for different reasons.
Before I give my answer, does anyone else want to add to that? Okay. My answer from a director's standpoint is very similar. And I think I went over a lot of this in my director's note, but the thing that draws me to this particular story is that none of the women even had to be, like, a woman does not have to be remarkable. They don't have to have been the first person to do this or, you know, the most famous for that for their story to matter. Every person who has, you know, their life cut short or has trauma inflicted on them, it's not their fault. And that does not mean that their story should just end or not be told. The women in these stories lived lives, right? Bessie was an adventurer and Alice was a nurse and Margaret was a caretaker who was known for that. She loved taking care of others. And the only thing that they dared to do that someone could point to was, you know, happen to marry the wrong guy. And his story is irrelevant. His reasoning, anything that he has to say on the matter is irrelevant. And TJ's right. There's so many, one of the things, you know, we talked about is you can go through and list serial killers from the beginning of time and they get nicknames and movies and they're lauded, books are written about them. And I can't really, for the most part, unless you're talking about one particularly, you know, famous victim, we don't know the names of the women who had their lives taken from them, or they are referred to, even in this case, if you look up this murder, you'll see them referred to as the brides in the bath. They have their individual identities taken away from them. And that's what's so important about this story, is that, you know, especially this year, this past year, when we've seen the numbers of calls into domestic violence helplines soar because of COVID and being trapped at home. It could be your neighbor, it could be you, it could be, you know, your future child, and those stories matter, and they're everywhere. So that's, you know, one of the things that draws me to this show. These stories need to be told, and the name of the person, the face of the person, it shouldn't matter. That's one thing I tried to do with Margaret in particular. She never saw his face in the show until the last moment, if you go through and watch, because we don't need to care about him. She doesn't need to care about him. He can be a top hat, and as quick as that hat was taken off of somebody, that's as quickly as we should remember his name. But remember all of theirs. All right.
So I think we have one more question and then we'll be good to go.
Okay, perfect.
So before we move on to your question, Frank, sorry. When Emilie was talking about it, it brought me back to what my design inspiration was with the costumes. I really wanted the women to feel like individuals. That's part of the reason you see them look so different from one costume to the other, is because I wanted you to see them as the person they were, not as the brides of the bath. That's all. Thanks.
All right. So Frank would like to know, as the show proceeded, did the water get any colder? Was it difficult? Hey, Mika, did the water get cold?
Yes. I didn't have any sleeves. I'm gonna blame. No, I love my costume. The second I saw that it was a jumpsuit, I was just like, yes, I love jumpsuits. And we're gonna pants. And my line's the one that's like, he made me wear a dress, but I'm wearing pants. But not having sleeves, and then the water getting cold, and the more we splashed around, there's less water, which means the water just got colder and colder. But between the shoots and moments we had, like our stage manager Jen was like really good at, like, in the backstage heating up kettles, just like pour like warm water, and like everyone in the crew too was like, we're readily like having our bathrobes by us and like little heaters, space heaters, safely away from water. So we definitely took care of each other for that. So yes, but yes, and we looked out for each other too. Can I add something about the looking out for each other? It's one of my favorite things that's wasn't relevant to any of the questions, so I didn't get to share. But our prop designer, Jenny, chose the ring. I don't know if you can see, to be hands holding each other, and you can never see that on film. I don't know if everyone on the team knew about it, but like all three of us still have it. We were able to keep it, 4 of us. And it just is like a nice reminder that, like, through the story of violence and tragic just happenings and things and topics that still occur. And I was talking to my mother about this, but within that, like, my favorite scene is the tea scene, where we get to share each other's and laugh. And I think that's probably the closest I felt with all 3 of us, even if we were all in our baths separately.
Thanks for reminding me, Mika. A quick shout out to Jennifer for her props. She made all these amazing documents that she printed onto a kind of fabric that could get wet and then just not fall apart and dry, and we can use again. And one of my biggest regrets in shooting it is I wasn't able to just really capture these documents. I just couldn't. There was just no way to like zoom in really quick and come back out. But I hopefully, you know, they at least informed the performance, and they really brought a lot to my experience being there. So they definitely helped in that way. But they were hard to see, hard to take in from the video perspective.
Yes, I will tell everyone I can how excited I was about having the magic waterproof paper. I am still in awe of it, and it has been weeks. So our prop designer was amazing. And she was definitely great at going with the flow in terms of things that we needed to change or adapt to get wet. I have been informed that that is all of the time that we have to answer questions today, but I do want to invite anyone that has questions that didn't get answered, or if there are any that you come up with, to just throw them on one of the show posts on the Facebook page for Strand Theater Company, and we'll make sure that they get answered for you, or on the Instagram. And I want to thank everyone who stayed to watch, as well as our actors for coming back. I know I've missed having them around, and the crew who and creative team who was able to be here to help answer questions tonight. So with that, I guess we can let everyone go. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if you haven't watched the show, please watch it, or watch it again, or tell someone else to watch it. So have a great night, everyone.